I didn't get the project in a meeting invite. I got it in a hallway. It was late Monday, after the optional all-hands that somehow always lasted an hour, and most of the floor had already gone quiet. The kind of quiet you only hear in corporate buildings when the day shift leaves, and the people who are still there are either ambitious or scared. I was walking back from the finance printer with a stack of vendor invoices when Grant Hollis, the executive VP over product delivery, called my name like it was a favor. "Ethan, got a second?" Grant had that polished, calm tone that made everything sound reasonable, even when it wasn't. He didn't lead with a problem. He didn't ask how I was. He just angled his body toward an empty conference room and expected me to follow. The same way you follow a fire alarm, even if you don't see smoke. Inside, he didn't sit. He stood at the end of the table, laptop open, phone face down, and a folder already waiting like it had been placed there for a photograph. "Congratulations," he said without smiling. "You're taking over Falcon." Falcon was not a bird. Falcon was a mess. It was the internal name for a re-platform project that had been limping along for 9 months, draining engineers, burning goodwill, and quietly poisoning relationships with our biggest enterprise client, Langford Health Systems. Every quarter, Falcon showed up on the executive dashboard with a friendly green dot and a sentence like, "On track, final integration phase." Everyone in the trenches knew it wasn't on track. The green dot was a costume. The project behind it was a car with duct tape on the radiator and a leak nobody wanted to admit existed. I looked at Grant. "Why me?" Grant finally glanced up as if he'd been waiting for that line. "You're detail-oriented," he said. "You don't get emotional. And you're new enough to bring fresh accountability." There it was, that phrase. Fresh accountability. It sounded like mentorship. In practice, it meant, if this blows up, it won't be my name on the crater. He slid the folder toward me with 2 fingers like it might smear. Inside was a single-page status report, the kind executives love because it has a clean header, a few colored bars, and just enough numbers to make people nod without asking questions. Falcon. Program health. Summary schedule. Slightly behind. Recovery plan. In place. Budget within range. Quality. Stable client sentiment. Improving risk. Moderate. Managed. And in the corner, in neat corporate language, it said, "Expectations remain achievable." The page looked fine. Too fine. Because the night before, I'd been in the data warehouse validating usage metrics for Langford's rollout. I wasn't supposed to be working Sunday night, but the CFO had asked for a quick gut check on adoption ahead of Friday's steering committee. That was code for, "We're about to tell the board something, and I need to know if it's a lie." I'd pulled the raw telemetry, feature activation, session frequency, error logs, direct from the event stream into a clean SQL extract. No dashboards, no executive filters, just the truth as it landed. And the truth was ugly. Langford's adoption was nowhere near the target. Error rates had spiked. 2 core integrations were failing intermittently. Their ticket volume had doubled in 10 days. The project wasn't slightly behind. It was slipping out of our hands. So when I saw Grant's report calmly declaring everything manageable, my stomach didn't drop. It tightened, like my body knew it was being handed a rope with a knot already tied. I kept my face neutral. That's a skill you learn if you've ever worked under someone who weaponizes reactions. "I'll need access to the full backlog, the client comms, and the reporting cadence," I said. Grant nodded too quickly. "You'll have it. My team will loop you in." His team, not the engineers, not the analysts. His team, the people who lived inside presentations and left the actual work to others. I flipped the page over, expecting notes. It was blank. Then Grant added, like an afterthought, "Also, don't get distracted by noise. The narrative matters here." I looked up. The narrative. Grant's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. They got colder, more precise. "Langford doesn't need to hear every hiccup," he said. "The board doesn't need to hear every hiccup. They need confidence. They need a plan. They need to see progress. You understand. What he meant was simple. If I came in and started saying, actually, the numbers are bad, I would be the problem. Not the project. Not the report. Me. I felt something bitter rise in my throat, but I swallowed it. Understood, I said. Grant's shoulders relaxed like I'd passed a test. He closed his laptop and picked up his phone, already halfway out of the room. Good. I've got dinner. Let's sync tomorrow. You'll do great. And that was it. A project with 9 months of rot, handed off like a forgotten expense report, and he was going to dinner. I walked back to my desk holding the folder like it had weight, even though it was 1 page. The office after hours had its own atmosphere. Dim lights, cleaning staff moving quietly, the hum of HVAC louder than the people. My team's corner of the floor was mostly empty. A few monitors glowed in the distance like someone had left their computer running and forgotten it existed. I sat down, opened my laptop, and stared at that single page. I didn't feel dramatic. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt aware. There's a specific kind of fear you get when you realize you're standing in the exact place where someone else wants the lightning to strike. So I did the first thing I always do when something doesn't smell right. I started collecting proof. Not in a heroic way, not in a movie way, in a boring, corporate, painfully realistic way. I opened the project SharePoint, pulled the weekly status deck, downloaded the last 4 versions, checked version history, screenshotted it. I opened the BI dashboard that fed the executive report, took timestamps, exported the data behind the charts, compared it to my raw extract from Sunday night. The numbers didn't line up, not by a rounding error, not by a definition change, by entire chunks of reality missing. Error categories excluded, time windows shifted, certain locations filtered out without documentation. A dashboard is just a story someone decided to tell with data, and this one was telling a story that made Grant look competent. Then I went 1 layer deeper, because dashboards don't change themselves. I opened the audit log, and there it was, quiet as a knife laid on a table. The executive report had been edited at 1:12 a.m., the night before the all-hands. Not by Grant, not by the project manager who'd supposedly been running Falcon, but by someone with admin-level access to the reporting model. Someone who had no reason to touch it, unless the goal wasn't reporting, unless the goal was making sure the report matched expectations instead of reality. I stared at the name in the log, feeling my pulse slow instead of spike, because now it wasn't just a failing project, it was a setup. And whoever had edited that report had just told me something without saying a word. They'd already decided who was going to be blamed. And if I was smart, I'd stop trying to save Falcon long enough to understand who was trying to bury me with it. By Tuesday morning, Falcon wasn't my project. It was my reputation. I walked into the daily stand-up at 9:05, and the room shifted the way it does when people have already been talking about you. Not loud, not obvious, just a few eyes lifting, a few smiles that didn't fully form, a couple engineers suddenly finding their keyboards fascinating. Our project manager, Donna, had set up the meeting invite as Falcon Recovery Stand-Up. Recovery. Like we'd survived something already. Dana was competent in the way people learn to be competent when they've spent too many months translating chaos into acceptable wording. She looked tired, not sleepy, tired, done tired. "Ethan," she said a little too brightly, "welcome to Falcon." A few people murmured polite hellos. Nobody sounded relieved. Grant wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He didn't need to be. He had already performed the only part he cared about, handing off the steering wheel before the crash. Dana shared her screen. A clean deck came up with a timeline, colored bars, and familiar green check marks. It was a version of the same story Grant had handed me, just with more slides. "We're in final integration," Dana said. "Langford has some concerns about reliability, but the sentiment is improving." I watched her say it like she was reading a script she didn't believe, because 10 hours ago I'd pulled the raw tickets. Sentiment wasn't improving. Sentiment was decaying. Langford's director of IT had used the phrase loss of confidence in an email that never made it into the deck. I didn't interrupt. I let the stand-up run. I listened. I took notes. That's how you survive politics. You don't start by making noise. You start by learning the shape of the room. After the stand-up, Dana followed me back to my desk. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly, like she didn't want anyone else to hear. I didn't know how much longer I could keep doing this. "Doing what?" I asked. Dana's eyes flicked toward the glass-walled executive offices across the floor. "Keeping the story clean," she said. There it was again. Story. Narrative. Clean. I kept my voice calm. "Who's been editing the reporting model?" Dana hesitated just a beat too long. Then she let out a breath like she'd been holding it for weeks. "Ryan," she said. "Ryan Telford." I felt my jaw tighten. Ryan wasn't on the Falcon team. He wasn't in delivery. He wasn't in engineering. Ryan was Grant's strategic operations analyst, which was a title that meant he could be anywhere, touch anything, and never be held responsible for the results. He lived in spreadsheets and executive briefings. He was the guy who could walk into a meeting, speak confidently about metrics he didn't build, and leave with everyone thanking him for clarity. He also had admin-level access to our reporting model, which was insane. "Why does he have access?" I asked. Dana gave me a look like I'd asked why the sky was blue. "Grant," she said. Grant wanted alignment. Alignment, another word that meant control. Dana lowered her voice more. "Every Thursday night before steering, Ryan asks me for the latest notes. Then he sends back clean numbers and slides. I stopped pushing back months ago. Every time I did, Grant pulled me aside and asked if I was committed to the outcome. Committed to the outcome? Not the truth. I leaned back in my chair and stared at my monitor, letting the irritation settle into something more useful. Focus. "Dana," I said, "do you have the original client emails? The ones that didn't make it into the deck?" She swallowed. "Yes." "Forward them to me," I said, "and send me the last 8 versions of the weekly deck, not the published one, the drafts." Dana nodded once. Then she hesitated again. "Ethan, are you going to fight this?" I didn't answer right away because the honest answer was, I didn't know what this was yet. A failing project? I could fix that. A manipulated report? I could expose that. A deliberate setup designed to hand a junior hire a grenade? That required a different plan. "I'm going to understand it," I said finally, "before I touch anything." Dana looked relieved in a way that made me even more certain she'd been living in fear. By lunchtime, the pressure started. It always starts with helpful emails. Grant's assistant sent me a calendar invite titled Falcon Exec Sync. Quick. Quick. It was never quick. I joined the call. Grant was already there, camera on, background tastefully blurred like he was broadcasting from a leadership seminar. He smiled. "Ethan, how's your first day as owner?" "Second day," I corrected politely. Grant chuckled like that was charming. "I want to make sure we're aligned," he said. "The board has expectations for Friday. Langford wants reassurance. You're going to present the recovery plan." My stomach went cold, not because I couldn't present, but because I knew what he was doing. He wasn't giving me a chance. He was moving the spotlight. "You want me to present this Friday?" I asked. "Yes," Grant said, as if it were obvious. "It's important they see you as the accountable leader. It builds confidence." Confidence for who? For Langford? For the board? Or for Grant when it inevitably went wrong? I kept my face neutral. I haven't had time to validate the metrics yet. Grant's smile didn't move, but his eyes sharpened. "The metrics are fine," he said. "Don't get lost in the weeds. Focus on the plan." The weeds. That's what executives call reality when reality is inconvenient. "I'll present a plan based on accurate data," I said carefully. "That's the only way it's credible." Grant's smile thinned. "Ethan, let's not complicate this. Ryan has been managing the reporting for months. He knows what the board needs to see. He said it like a compliment, but it sounded like a warning. Then he added softly, "Remember, this is a visibility moment. You want to show leadership, not paranoia." Paranoia. The word hit like a slap, disguised as advice. I felt anger flash, hot and immediate. The unfairness of it, the way he could label basic diligence as weakness. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just said, "Send me the raw data source Ryan uses. I'll reconcile it." Grant paused, just a fraction too long. "Sure," he said too smoothly. "We'll get you what you need." The call ended. 10 minutes later, an email arrived from Ryan. Subject: Falcon Metrics Pack. Steering version attached was a polished Excel file and a slide deck. And in the email body, one line. "These are the numbers we've been using. Let me know if you need help telling the story." Telling the story. I opened the Excel. It looked clean. Tabs labeled neatly. Charts pre-built. Summary metrics already calculated. And that's what made my skin crawl. Because raw data is messy. Raw data has missing values and weird spikes and footnotes and edge cases. This wasn't raw. This was curated. So I did what I always do when someone hands me something too perfect. I checked the metadata. The workbook had been created 3 months ago. The formulas referenced a hidden sheet. I unhid it. The hidden sheet was a mapping table. Definitions of what counted as adoption, what counted as error, what counted as successful integration, and the definitions were generous. Errors under 30 seconds? Excluded. Tickets tagged user training? Excluded. Integration failures labeled third-party dependency? Excluded. Ryan wasn't measuring reality. He was measuring the version of reality that made the report look like a recovery. I felt my irritation sharpen into clarity. Then I did something small, almost petty, but necessary. I compared Ryan's adoption rate calculation to the raw event stream extract I'd pulled Sunday night. Ryan's adoption rate, 82%. Raw extract adoption rate, 54%. That wasn't a discrepancy. That was a fabrication. And then my phone buzzed. A new email, this one from Langford. Subject: Immediate concern, Falcon stability. It was from their director of IT, Meredith Shaw, short, professional, no emotion, but I could hear it anyway. "Ethan, we've experienced 3 production incidents in 48 hours. Our executive sponsor's asking whether we should pause rollout. We need a clear answer today." I stared at the email, because that wasn't moderate managed risk. That was a client standing at the edge, looking down. And if they paused rollout, Falcon wasn't just failing. It was going to become visible. I took a slow breath, opened my notes, and started building a timeline. Not a dramatic timeline, not a revenge timeline, a factual one. Who said what? When the numbers changed? Who edited the model? What Langford reported? What the executive deck claimed? By the time I finished, one thing was undeniable. Grant wasn't handing me a broken project. He was handing me a pre-written collapse, with my name set to be the headline. And the worst part? The board meeting was Friday, which meant I had 3 days to either fix the truth or become the scapegoat. So I replied to Meredith Shaw at Langford with one sentence. "We're not pausing rollout yet. I'm reviewing the incident pattern personally. I'll call you in 1 hour." Then I opened the audit log again. Because if Ryan had been editing the story, I needed to know how far back this went, and I needed to know whether I was the first junior hire Grant had tried to bury, or just the latest. The hour after Meredith's email felt unreal, like the building had tilted and nobody else noticed. I called her exactly when I said I would. No assistant, no quick agenda, just me, a legal pad, and the raw incident logs on my screen. Meredith picked up on the second ring. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear what control was covering. "Ethan," she said, "I need to know if you're actually seeing what we're seeing." "I am," I said. 3 production incidents, 2 tied to the integration layer, 1 tied to session failures after authentication. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There was a pause, then a quiet exhale. Thank you, she said, because your executive team keeps telling my sponsor this is normal stabilization. He's losing patience. Who told him that? I asked, already knowing the answer. Meredith didn't hesitate. Grant. Friday call. He said the data showed improvement. My stomach tightened, not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed the shape of the trap. Grant wasn't just polishing a report internally. He was selling that story to the client, too. Meredith, I said, I can't promise you a clean week, but I can promise you accuracy and a plan that matches reality. Here's what I need from you. Forward me the incident timestamps, ticket IDs, and the names of your on-call contacts. I'm going to build a joint timeline with our SRE lead. You have an SRE lead on this? She asked, skeptical. Not yet, I said, but I will. That made her laugh once, short and humorless. Okay, she said. I'll send everything. And Ethan. If Friday is another deck full of green bars, my sponsor will pause rollout. He's already drafting the email. I understand, I said. I'll call you tonight with a decision, not a story. When I hung up, I didn't sit there feeling heroic. I didn't feel like the guy who swoops in and saves the client. I felt like someone who just realized the fire alarm had been disabled on purpose. I pulled up our incident management tool and searched Falcon and Langford for the last 30 days. The patterns weren't random. 2 of the outages clustered right after a release window that had been approved out of cycle. The authentication errors spiked only in certain facilities, locations that ran a slightly different configuration because of an old legacy interface. That interface had a name in our code base everyone hated, Bridgegate. I messaged Luis, the engineering lead assigned to Falcon. He was one of those engineers who didn't waste words because his day was already wasted by other people's decisions. Me. Need 15 min now. Langford Incident Cluster. Luis. On it. War Room. Me. Yes. Pull release approvals. Plus config diffs for Bridgegate. We spun up a call with Luis, our SRE manager, Priya, and Dana. Priya joined first and immediately asked the question I'd been avoiding. Why am I hearing about this now? She said. We don't have Falcon flagged as high risk in the on-call rotation. I didn't look at Dana when I answered. Because the executive reporting says Falcon is stable, I said, and because stability was being defined in a way that made alerts optional. Priya went quiet. Then she said, show me. So I did. I shared my screen and showed her Ryan's hidden mapping table, the one that excluded error types and redefined what counted as the successful integration. Priya stared at it like she was reading a confession. That's not reporting, she said slowly. That's reputation management. Luis swore under his breath. Dana didn't say anything. She just looked down, like she'd been waiting for someone else to finally say it out loud. We dug into the actual root cause. It wasn't sabotage in code. It was something worse because it was mundane. A configuration change had reduced retry attempts on Bridgegate to near zero during peak hours, which turned minor latency spikes into full failures. The change had been approved as a temporary performance improvement to make dashboards look cleaner. Cleaner dashboards, less noise, better narrative. The approval trail for that config change sat inside our change management system, complete with a justification field that read, reduce false incident perception ahead of steering. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, sharp and immediate. They hadn't fixed the problem. They'd tried to make the problem stop being seen. Priya spoke first. We can revert this within 2 hours, but you need to decide if rollout continues. Because if we keep pushing new sites, while Bridgegate is unstable, we're just creating new failure points. Dana finally lifted her head. Grant will never agree to pause. I'm not asking Grant, I said. The room went silent for half a second, like everyone was testing whether I meant it. Luis nodded once. Priya didn't smile, but her posture shifted. She respected a decision. Okay, Priya said. Then we do it clean. Revert config, document everything, and notify Langford with facts. We executed like adults. No dramatic speeches, no chest thumping. Just coordination, revert, monitor, confirm error rates fall, document in the ticketing system, and put a hold on the next release until we had real stability data. Then I called Meredith back. Here's what happened, I said. A config change reduced retries in a way that made minor latency look like full outages. We reverted it. Your error rates should drop within the hour. I'm recommending we slow rollout for 72 hours while we validate Bridgegate under load. Meredith was quiet, then said, "Who approved the change?" I looked at the approval screen again. I could have lied. I could have said, "We're investigating." Instead, I told her the truth in the only safe way I had. It was approved through our change system. I said, "I'm documenting the trail. You'll have a written incident summary tonight." That satisfied her, partially. But when the call ended, something in me shifted, because I realized the client wasn't the only one being lied to. I pulled the audit logs again, this time not just for the dashboard model, but for the status deck itself, version history, editors, timestamps, comments. The same rhythm showed up like a fingerprint. Every Thursday night, edits. Every Friday morning, a clean steering version. Every Monday, internal teams scrambling under the weight of a reality the deck didn't mention. Then I went to HR's internal directory and looked up the people who'd owned Falcon before me. One had transferred to a different division without explanation. Another had left the company after a mutual separation. A third had been quietly moved into an individual contributor role. No leadership, no visibility. And each handoff happened right before a major steering meeting. Grant didn't inherit problems. He redistributed them. That night, I stopped being the hero. Not because I didn't care about fixing Falcon, I did. But because I finally understood, if I spent all my energy saving the project, while they rewrote the facts, I would still lose. So I did both. I fixed what I could, and I built a record they couldn't erase. I requested a formal snapshot from data governance, an immutable export of the dashboard audit, history and model changes. I didn't frame it as an accusation. I framed it as risk control ahead of a board review. Then I saved everything locally in a folder titled something painfully boring, Falcon Steering Reconciliation, because boring names don't attract attention. At 9:47 p.m., an email came in from Grant. Subject, Friday Steering, Final Materials. One sentence, send your slides to Ryan by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Use the approved metrics pack. Approved, metrics, pack. I stared at the screen, feeling the realization settle like a weight. He didn't want me to present the truth. He wanted me to present his version of the truth, so that when the board realized expectations weren't met, the story would be simple. It wasn't Grant's failure. It was Ethan's. And then, right as I was closing my laptop, another invite landed on my calendar. From HR. Title, Alignment Check-In. Role fit scheduled for Thursday morning. No agenda, no context. Just a meeting that didn't exist yesterday. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the invite, feeling something colder than anger. Because now I understood the timeline. Friday wasn't just a steering meeting, it was a trap closing, and HR wasn't joining because they cared about Falcon. They were joining because someone had already decided what would happen to me after the board saw the numbers. Thursday morning, I didn't walk into the HR meeting like a victim. I walked in like someone carrying a file. Not physically, not dramatically, but mentally, because I had already learned the only rule that matters. When executives start using phrases like role fit and alignment, if you don't bring receipts, you bring your own funeral. The invite was for 9:30 a.m. in a small glass conference room near the executive offices, the kind of room built for conversations that were supposed to feel private, even though everyone could see you through the walls. When I arrived, Grant was already inside, so was Ryan, and HR, Kendra Mills, senior business partner, sitting with her laptop open, a notepad beside it. Her expression calm in that practiced way HR learns when they're about to Just ask questions. Grant stood as I entered, warm smile on, like this was a friendly check-in. Ethan, he said, thanks for jumping on this. We just want to make sure you feel supported. Supported? Ryan nodded at me like we were teammates. He didn't look worried. He looked prepared. Kendra smiled politely. Hi, Ethan. This is informal. Just an alignment conversation. Informal IHR meeting with an EVP and his analyst. Sure. I sat down and opened my notebook. Blank page, pen in hand, calm posture. I watched them do the thing people do when they think the outcome is already decided. They start speaking in circles. Grant led. So, he said, Falcon has had some noise this week. We've been hearing different narratives, and I want to make sure we're all communicating consistently, especially with Langford and the board. Kendra nodded. Yes, consistent messaging is important. Ryan added smoothly, we don't want anyone blindsided tomorrow. Expectations need to be managed. It was almost impressive how they framed manipulation as responsibility. I let Grant talk for 30 seconds. Then I asked a question that sounded simple. Do you want consistency, I said, or accuracy? The room paused just slightly. Grant's smile held, but it hardened at the edges. Both, he said. Great, I replied. Then we're aligned. I turned my laptop toward them. Not the whole folder, not the whole timeline, just one screen. The dashboard audit log with timestamps and editor names. I didn't accuse. I didn't call anyone a liar. I just stated facts like they were weather. Falcon's executive dashboard model was edited at 1:12 a.m. Monday, I said, and again at 12:54 a.m. Thursday. Both times, error definitions were changed in the mapping table. Those changes increased adoption and decreased incident rates in the summary. Ryan's eyes flicked to the screen. His posture stiffened. Grant didn't look at it for long. He looked at me. Kendra leaned forward slightly. Ethan, are you saying the data was incorrect? I'm saying the data was curated, I said, and that curation wasn't document. So if we present it as reality, we're misleading the board and the client. Grant laughed once, small, contained. Ethan, you're over-indexing on technicalities. Those are just classification adjustments. Ryan's been handling reporting for months. Ryan nodded quickly. Exactly, it's normal smoothing. You're new to this kind of stakeholder environment? That word, new, hit the same nerve as paranoia, but I didn't react. I clicked to the next screen, the incident log from Langford with timestamps, then our internal incident tickets, then the change management approval that said, reduce false incident perception ahead of steering. I watched Grant's expression shift. Not panic, not fear. Something more controlled, annoyance that the script was being rewritten. I'm not debating stakeholder environment, I said. I'm debating whether we can justify these exclusions. If legal ever asks why our internal records don't match what we presented. Kendra's pen stopped moving. Legal? She repeated. Langford is discussing a rollout pause, I said. If they pause and if they claim we misrepresented stability, it becomes a contractual risk, not a narrative issue. That was the first time I saw Ryan hesitate, because HR doesn't care about dashboards. HR cares about liability. And when you use the word contractual, people stop pretending it's just internal politics. Grant leaned back in his chair, slower now. Ethan, he said, voice measured, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. Tomorrow is about confidence. We need the board to stay calm. No, I said. Tomorrow is about expectation alignment. The board will stay calm if we tell them the truth, plus a plan. They won't stay calm if they learn we kept telling them everything was green and then missed the target. Ryan tried to recover. The target is still achievable. It isn't, I said, interrupting for the first time. Not loud, just final. Not with Bridgegate, not with current error rates, and not with Langford's executive sponsor drafting the pause email. Grant's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? I didn't smile. Because I spoke to Meredith Shaw, I said, and because I'm the one now responsible for the fallout, if we pretend otherwise. Kendra looked from Grant to Ryan, then back to me. Her face was still neutral, but her attention shifted. She was no longer taking notes for alignment. She was documenting a risk event. Grant held my gaze for a long moment, then said, "Okay, let's reset. What are you proposing?" I was ready. "I'm proposing we present 2 things tomorrow," I said. 1, the honest status. 2, the mitigation plan we've already started. Config revert, incident stabilization, and a 72-hour rollout slowdown. Ryan frowned. A slowdown will spook the board. A surprise pause will spook them more, I said. Grant's tone went colder. "You understand what you're doing, right? You're undermining leadership." I kept my voice flat. "I'm preventing leadership from being blindsided by reality." Silence. Then Grant pivoted, because that's what executives do when the facts don't cooperate. They change the conversation. "Let's talk about role fit," he said. "This may not be the right level of stakeholder exposure for you. You're excellent operationally, but this requires nuance." There it was, the trap jaw closing. Kendra looked up again, attentive. Grant continued, "If tomorrow goes poorly because we present worst-case scenarios, it reflects on the organization. We need people who can manage up, not just manage data." He said it softly, like mentorship, but it was a threat. "Comply, or we'll label you as not a fit." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I asked Kendra a question. "Kendra," I said, "is this meeting being documented as performance-related?" Her eyes widened slightly, then she recovered. "It's an alignment conversation." "Then I'd like to keep it aligned," I said. "If there are concerns about my performance, I want them in writing, specific, with examples." Grant's jaw tightened. Ryan stared at the table. Kendra hesitated, then said carefully, "We're not at that stage." "Good," I said. "Then we stay on tomorrow. We present accurate status, supported by internal logs, and we present the stabilization plan." Grant leaned forward, "And if I disagree?" I held his gaze. "Then you can present the curated metrics pack yourself, but I won't put my name on data I can't defend." That sentence wasn't dramatic. It was the first time I watched the power in the room shift, because it forced a choice. If Grant kept pushing the fake numbers, he would have to own them publicly. If he let me present accuracy, he'd lose control of the narrative. Either way, he couldn't use me as the shield anymore. Kendra cleared her throat. "Let's pause here. I think we need to ensure tomorrow's materials are compliant and supportable." Compliant. That word landed like a lock clicking shut. Grant didn't argue with HR when HR used compliance language. He knew better. He gave a tight smile. "Of course," Ryan jumped in, trying to salvage. "I can update the pack to reflect Ethan's concerns." "No," I said. "No more hidden exclusions. No more smoothing. We show both. The executive view and the raw reconciliation appendix. Transparency." Grant's eyes flashed with irritation, but he didn't fight. Not with HR watching. Not with the word compliant hanging in the air. The meeting ended the way these meetings always end. Everyone acting polite, while the real war moves underground. As I walked back to my desk, my phone buzzed. A text from Dana. "Grant just pulled the steering room for 7 a.m. tomorrow. He's telling people the deck is being finalized." Translation, he was panicking. And then at 2:18 p.m., something else happened. The kind of thing that makes the hair on your arms rise. My access to the reporting model was revoked. Not by IT, not by a ticket, by an admin change. I opened the dashboard tool. Error. Insufficient permissions. I tried the change management system. Same. They weren't just fighting the story now. They were trying to blind me before the board meeting. And that was when Priya called. "They just asked me to hold off on sending the incident summary to Langford," she said. Her voice was tight. "Grant said it would confuse the sponsor." I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. "Send it anyway," I said. "But CC legal." Priya paused. "Are you sure?" I was sure. Because when someone starts cutting access, it's not strategy anymore. It's desperation. And Priya, I added, export everything. Logs, approvals, chat transcripts. Put it in a secure folder. If they're willing to rewrite the report, they'll be willing to rewrite the history. She didn't ask why. She just said, done. After the call, I opened my calendar. Friday steering was at 10 a.m. Grant had scheduled a pre-brief at 7 a.m. He was going to walk into that room and try to control the narrative before anyone else could speak. So I did something I hadn't done yet. I forwarded my reconciliation folder, audit logs, change approvals, Langford emails, incident tickets, to our internal legal intake address with a simple subject line. Falcon. Data. Reporting. Reconciliation for steering, no accusation, no emotion, just a record, time-stamped, inside a system they couldn't quietly delete. Then I printed one page, just one. The change approval that said, reduce false incident perception ahead of steering. Because if tomorrow became a performance meeting disguised as steering, I wanted something in my hand that didn't depend on access. That night, at 11:03 p.m., I received an email from Grant. Subject, Friday speaking roles. 2 lines. Ryan will walk through metrics. You will cover delivery execution. Stick to your lane. I read it twice, slow. He wasn't backing down. He was doubling down. He was trying to put Ryan between the board and the truth and put me on the hook for execution. He still wanted the same ending. Falcon misses expectations. Board demands answers, and the new owner takes the fall. I didn't reply. I just set my alarm for 5:15 a.m. Because the next morning, I wasn't going to fight for the microphone. I was going to walk into the room with something stronger than a narrative. I was going to walk in with evidence that had already left the building. At 7:03 a.m., the steering room looked like every other high-stakes corporate meeting. Cold coffee, warm nerves, and a wall monitor showing a deck nobody wanted to own. Grant was already there, standing, not sitting, like he was hosting. Ryan sat 2 seats to his right, with his laptop open, fingers poised, ready to drive the story. Dana hovered near the back with a tablet, eyes down. Priya wasn't there yet. Grant glanced at me as I walked in, then immediately turned back to the group like I was furniture. Good, he said. We'll keep this tight. Ryan walks metrics. Ethan covers delivery, no rabbit holes. He looked around the room like he'd just restored order. Then the door opened again. Kendra from HR stepped in, unexpected for a 7 a.m. pre-brief, and behind her was someone I recognized from a single all-hands months earlier. Marissa Trent, corporate counsel. Not general counsel, not outside counsel. Internal, calm. The kind of person who doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't need to. Grant's posture changed on a dime. His smile appeared like a reflex. Marissa, he said, didn't know you'd be joining. She nodded once. I was looped in late last night. I'm here to observe and to make sure we don't create exposure by misstating facts. Expose, observe, facts. Ryan's fingers stopped moving. Grant cleared his throat. Of course. We're aligned. Marissa didn't respond to that. She just sat down, opened a folder, and looked at the screen like she already knew what it contained. The pre-brief lasted 12 minutes. Grant spoke in confident summaries. Ryan scrolled through green bars and neat percentages. Every time the deck reached a number that didn't match reality, I watched Ryan's eyes flick to Grant, like he needed permission to keep lying. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just waited. Because for the first time all week, Grant wasn't the most powerful person in the room. At 9:58 a.m., the board members started filing in for the official steering committee. Our CFO took his seat. 2 VPs I'd never seen in person sat down with the kind of stillness that comes from people who've lived through enough corporate crises to smell one early. Grant stood, welcomed everyone, and launched into the opening slide like it was a keynote. Falcon has made strong progress, he said. We're in final integration. The client sentiment is improving. We remain within range. He gestured to Ryan. Ryan began the metrics rundown: adoption, reliability, a normalized incident trend that looked almost flat. And it might have worked if he'd been allowed to speak without being questioned. But 2 minutes in, the CFO interrupted. "Ryan," he said, "what changed between last week's incident chart and this week's? Because my team's raw incident feed shows a spike." Ryan blinked. "We refined classification to remove noise. Some tickets were—" The CFO didn't let him finish. "Define noise," he said flat. Ryan swallowed. "User training tickets, short-duration errors, things that don't materially impact." A board member at the far end leaned forward. She didn't sound angry. She sounded precise. "Who approved those definition changes?" she asked. Grant moved quickly, smooth. "Those are standard reporting adjustments. We do that across programs to maintain consistency." Marissa shifted slightly in her seat. Not dramatic, just a sign she was paying attention. The board member didn't look at Grant. She looked at Ryan. "Ryan," she repeated, "who approved the definition change?" Ryan's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "I maintain the reporting model," he said, under Grant's direction. Grant's smile stayed on, but his eyes narrowed. He tried to take the wheel back. "Let's not get bogged down. The bigger point is—" The same board member held up her hand. Not loud, not rude. Just final. "We're not bogged down," she said. "We're clarifying whether we're being shown performance or presentation." The room went quiet in that specific way, where everyone stops breathing at once because the meeting just changed categories. Then the COO, who had been silent, turned to me. "Ethan," he said, "you're the current owner. Do these metrics match what you see operationally?" This was the moment Grant had been engineering all week. If I said yes, I became complicit. If I said no, I became not a team player. I didn't look at Grant. I looked at the COO. "No," I said, "not without the exclusions." Grant's jaw tightened. I continued, still calm. "If you include all integration failures and the Langford incident stream, adoption is materially lower and stability is materially worse. We reverted a config change this week that was approved specifically to reduce perceived incidents ahead of steering. It improves stability immediately, but it also proves the dashboard wasn't describing reality." Dana's head snapped up. Ryan stared at his screen like it might save him. Grant cut in, voice sharper. "Ethan is overreacting. He's new to stakeholder comms and—" Marissa spoke for the first time. "Grant," she said evenly, "please don't characterize an accuracy dispute as an emotion issue." Grant froze, not fully, just enough for everyone to see it. The COO's eyes narrowed. "Marissa, what was looped in last night?" Marissa didn't grandstand. She simply answered, "I received a reconciliation package showing audit logs, definition changes, and client communications that did not align with the executive deck," she said. "I can't opine on intent in this meeting, but I can say we should treat the current deck as incomplete without the raw appendix." The board member turned back to Ryan. "Is there an appendix?" Ryan's voice came out thin. "Not in the distributed version." I reached into my bag and placed one printed page on the table. Not like a weapon, like a receipt. The change approval. "Here," I said. "This is the justification field for the config change. It states it was to reduce false incident perception ahead of steering." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then the CFO asked a question that landed like a hammer. "Who authorized that change?" he said. Priya had entered quietly at the back during the discussion. She spoke without hesitation. "It was approved through change management by Ryan," she said. "With executive awareness. I have the full export. Legal is already CC'd on the incident summary we sent to Langford." Grant's face didn't turn red. It went pale in a controlled way, like his body was trying not to betray him. The COO leaned back, slow. "Okay," he said. "Here's what's going to happen." He looked at Marissa. "You in compliance open a formal review of reporting governance for Falcon, effective immediately." He looked at the CFO. "Finance and data governance lock the reporting model." Immutable exports. No edits without documented approval. Then he looked directly at Grant. And you're stepping back from Falcon pending that review. Grant started to speak. Something about leadership, context, narrative. The board member cut him off with the same calm hand. Save it for the investigation, she said. That was the moment the room decided Grant wasn't the narrator anymore. The rest of the meeting moved fast. Clean, corporate, merciless. They asked me for an operational plan, not a story. I gave them one. 72-hour rollout slowdown, joint incident timeline with Langford, Bridgegate stabilization, and a transparent weekly dashboard with definitions locked and visible. They asked Priya for a reliability owner. She named herself and Luis. They asked Dana what had been withheld. Dana didn't throw anyone under the bus. She simply told the truth. Drafts were edited late, emails were softened, and she'd been pressured to keep the story clean. No melodrama, just facts. By noon, my access was restored, not as a favor, but as a controlled change with governance oversight. By 3 p.m., Kendra from HR sent me a written summary of the role fit meeting, reframed as a documentation event, not a performance warning. The tone was different now, not warm, not hostile, careful. By end of day, Langford didn't pause. Meredith called me and said, "Your incident summary is the first honest thing I've gotten in weeks. Keep it that way, and we'll keep moving." And that night, when the building finally went quiet again, I sat at my desk and opened the same one-page status report Grant had slid across the table. Slightly behind. Recovery plan in place. Expectations achievable. It hadn't been written for the board. It had been written for the blame. I closed it, filed it into the case folder legal had opened, and shut down my laptop without that familiar tightness in my chest. Because the project was still hard. The client was still demanding. The work wasn't magically fixed, but the trap was gone. They couldn't hide the numbers anymore. They couldn't rewrite the story after the fact. And they couldn't pretend they'd handed me a worst project out of generosity. They handed it to me because they thought I'd quietly carry it when it sank. They were wrong. Not because I yelled, not because I threatened, because I documented everything and made sure the truth reached the room before the narrative did.